There comes a moment in every person's life when they stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start declaring, "This ends now." But here's what nobody tells you about that moment. It terrifies the people who've been feeding off your confusion. Right now, someone listening to this is nodding because you've felt it. That shift, that awakening. You've started seeing the patterns. You've begun questioning why you always feel drained after certain conversations. You've noticed how some people seem to thrive on your self-doubt. And just when you thought you were finally breaking free, they pulled out their most dangerous weapon. How many of you have experienced this? You start standing up for yourself, setting boundaries, refusing to accept less than you deserve. And suddenly the very people who should celebrate your growth are telling you that you've changed, and not in a good way. Raise your hand if this sounds familiar. Keep it up if they made you feel guilty for getting stronger. Most people spend their entire lives living reactive existences, bouncing from one emotional manipulation to another like pinballs in someone else's machine. They wake up each morning not to create their day, but to respond to whatever crisis, drama, or emotional emergency someone else has manufactured. They measure their worth by how much others approve of them, how much peace they can keep, how small they can make themselves to avoid conflict. This isn't living. This is survival mode disguised as normal life. The moment you begin to awaken from this trance, the moment you start recognizing your own value and setting standards for how you'll be treated, something remarkable happens. The people who've been benefiting from your confusion panic. They realize their supply is about to be cut off. Their emotional feeding ground is about to be closed. And that's when they deploy their final, most insidious trick. Sarah thought she had finally broken free. After years of walking on eggshells around her mother, constantly apologizing for things that weren't her fault, and sacrificing her own needs to keep peace. She'd started therapy. She'd learned about boundaries. She'd begun saying no. For the first time in 34 years, she felt like she could breathe. Then came the phone call that nearly destroyed everything. "Sarah, I'm worried about you," her mother said, trembling with what sounded like genuine concern. "You've become so selfish lately. This isn't who you raised you to be. You're hurting people who love you. I don't even recognize my own daughter anymore." Those words hit Sarah like a physical blow. All her progress, all her growth, all her newfound strength, suddenly felt wrong. Maybe she had become selfish. Maybe she was hurting people. Maybe the old Sarah, the one who never said no, who never asked for anything, who absorbed everyone else's emotions like a sponge. Maybe that was the real her, the good her. Sarah almost gave up everything she'd gained that day. Almost. Because what her mother was doing, what every narcissist does when they see you waking up, was deploying the most sophisticated manipulation tactic in their arsenal. They take your growth and reframe it as your sickness. They take your healing and call it your wound. They take your strength and label it as selfishness. This is the final dirty trick, and it's devastatingly effective, because it targets the very thing that makes you beautiful, your desire to be a good person. Think about how twisted this is. You spend years accepting crumbs, and when you finally ask for a seat at the table, they accuse you of being greedy. You endure years of being interrupted, dismissed, and ignored. And when you finally find your pride, they say you're being difficult. You sacrifice your dreams, your energy, your peace of mind for others. And when you finally start protecting these precious resources, they call you selfish. The manipulation is so subtle, so perfectly crafted, that it can undo months or even years of progress in a single conversation. Because they know you. They know that you'd rather be loved than respected. They know you'd rather keep peace than stand up for yourself. They know you'd rather doubt yourself than risk being seen as a bad person. But here's what they don't want you to know. Your guilt is their GPS system back into your life. Every time you feel guilty for setting a boundary, you're being guided back into prison. Every time you question whether you have the right to be treated well, you're being led back to your cage. Every time you apologize for wanting more than scraps, You're handing them the key to your freedom. This final trick works because it hijacks your moral compass. It takes your natural compassion and weaponizes it against you. It convinces you that your health is actually sickness, that your strength is actually weakness, that your growth is actually regression. Can you see how perfectly this is designed? They wait until you're strong enough to threaten their control but not yet strong enough to resist their manipulation. They wait until you've tasted freedom but haven't yet learned to trust your own judgment completely. They strike at the exact moment when you're most vulnerable to this particular form of psychological warfare. And they don't do this from a place of love or concern. They do it from panic, pure desperate panic, because they know that once you see through this final trick, once you recognize it for what it is, they lose their power over you forever. How many times have you apologized for becoming stronger? How many times have you felt bad about feeling good? When did wanting to be treated with respect become a character flaw in your mind? When did protecting your energy become an act of selfishness worth feeling guilty about? Why do you feel guilty for refusing to accept crumbs when you deserve a feast? Let these questions settle in your mind for a moment. Feel the weight of them, because your answers will tell you everything you need to know about whether you're still trapped in their web. If you've ever felt guilty for growing, if you've ever apologized for getting stronger, if you've ever second-guessed your right to be treated well, then you've encountered this final manipulation. And recognizing it is the most important thing that will ever happen to your freedom. This moment, right now, is your decision point. This is where you choose between the person you've been conditioned to be and the person you were born to be. This is where you decide whether their opinion of your growth matters more than your actual growth. The person sitting next to you might be dealing with this right now. The person you live with might be using this technique on you as we speak. Then your head might be repeating their words, trying to convince you that your progress is actually your problem. But here's the truth they're desperately trying to hide from you. The fact that they're using this final trick means you're closer to freedom than you've ever been. They wouldn't waste their most powerful weapon unless they knew they were about to lose you completely. Their panic is proof of your progress. Their desperation is evidence of your growth. Their manipulation is confirmation that you're on the right path. This recognition changes everything, because once you see this trick for what it is, once you understand that their attempt to make you feel guilty for healing is actually their confession that you're healing successfully, you can never be fooled by it again. You start to see that every time they say you've changed, what they really mean is you're no longer controllable. Every time they say you're being selfish, what they really mean is you're no longer putting my needs above your own. Every time they say this isn't who you are, what they really mean is this isn't who I need you to be for me to maintain power over you. The old you would have crumbled under this assault. The old you would have apologized, backed down, returned to the familiar pattern of self-sacrifice and people-pleasing. The old you would have chosen their approval over your own well-being. But you're not the old you anymore. You're awakening. And that awakening terrifies them more than anything else in the world, because they know what comes next. Once you stop falling for this final manipulation, once you stop letting them use your compassion against you, once you stop apologizing for your growth, that's when you become truly free. That's when you step into a power they can never touch again. This is your moment. This is your choice. This is your chance to say, I see what you're doing, and it won't work anymore. This is where you decide to keep walking toward your freedom, no matter who tries to convince you that your healing is your sickness, that your strength is your weakness, that your growth is your shame. What happens next depends entirely on what you choose to do with this knowledge. And that choice will determine not just your next chapter but the entire rest of your story. Now that you see the trick, understanding it is only half the battle. Building an unshakable foundation is what makes you immune to future manipulation. Because knowledge without action is just expensive entertainment. Show of hands. How many of you have learned something powerful about yourself or your situation, felt excited about the breakthrough but then found yourself right back in the same patterns a week later? Keep those hands up if this has happened more than once. This happens because recognizing manipulation isn't enough. You need to build something stronger than their trick. You need to create a foundation so solid that when they come with their guilt trips, their emotional manipulation, their attempts to make you doubt your growth, you don't even wobble. The foundation starts with understanding one crucial truth. Your success cannot be measured by their approval. Think about a farmer for a moment. When a farmer plants seeds, does he measure his success by what the neighbors think of his crops? Does he change his planting schedule because someone tells him he's being selfish for wanting a good harvest? Does he abandon his fields because someone suggests that tending his crops makes him a bad person? Absolutely not. He measures success by the health of his soil, the strength of his roots, the quality of his harvest. He knows that certain seasons require different activities, and he doesn't apologize for following the natural rhythms of growth. Yet somehow, when it comes to our emotional and mental growth, we've been conditioned to measure our success by external approval rather than internal progress. We've been taught to let other people's comfort level determine our growth trajectory. This is why the narcissist's final trick works so well. They know you've been programmed to seek validation from outside yourself. They know you're more afraid of being seen as selfish than you are of sacrificing your own well-being. They know you'll abandon your own growth if they can convince you it's hurting others. But real success, lasting success, comes from developing internal standards that no one else can vote on. When you start measuring your progress by how you feel about yourself rather than how others feel about you, something remarkable happens. Their opinion becomes just that, an opinion, not a directive, not a requirement, not a truth you have to accept. You stop asking what will they think and start asking what do I know to be true. You stop seeking permission to grow and start giving yourself the authorization to become who you're meant to be. This shift is terrifying to people who've built their sense of power on your insecurity because they realize they can no longer control your choices with their emotions. How do you build this kind of internal foundation? The same way the farmer builds his harvest, through small, consistent daily actions that compound over time. Every morning when you wake up and choose to validate your own feelings instead of dismissing them, you're building strength. Every time you say no to something that drains your energy, you're building boundaries. Every time you choose your peace over their approval, you're building power. These might seem like small actions, but here's what most people don't understand. Small actions repeated daily create massive results over time. The compound effect works in every area of life, including your emotional and mental strength. A farmer doesn't plant a seed on Monday and expect a harvest on Tuesday. He plants the seed, waters it consistently, protects it from pests, gives it proper nutrients, and trusts the process. Day after day, week after week, season after season, the same principle applies to your emotional strength. You don't set one boundary and expect to be manipulation-proof forever. You practice saying no in small situations, so you'll have the strength to say no in big ones. You validate your own feelings in minor circumstances, so you'll trust yourself in major ones. Each time you choose your well-being over their comfort, you're making a deposit in your emotional strength account. Each time you refuse to apologize for having standards, you're building your confidence account. Each time you trust your instincts over their gaslighting, you're developing your intuition account. And just like compound interest, the effects multiply over time. But here's what the narcissist doesn't want you to know. This process gets easier with practice. The first time you set a boundary, it feels terrifying. The 10th time, it feels empowering. The 11th time, it feels natural. They want you to believe that standing up for yourself will always be this difficult, that choosing yourself will always feel this guilty, that protecting your energy will always seem this selfish. But that's a lie designed to keep you from practicing. The truth is, every time you choose yourself, the next choice becomes clearer. Every time you trust your instincts, your intuition becomes stronger. Every time you refuse to accept less than you deserve, your standards become more solid. This is why consistency matters more than perfection. You don't need to have perfect boundaries to start building stronger ones. You don't need to completely trust yourself to start listening to your inner. You don't need to be fearless to start acting courageously. You just need to start, today, with the next choice you make. But here's something else you need to understand. This journey isn't linear. Just like farming has seasons, your growth will have seasons too. There will be times when you feel strong and confident, and times when you feel vulnerable and uncertain. The narcissist knows that. They watch for your vulnerable seasons, your difficult times, your moments of doubt. They wait for your winter periods, and then swoop in with their manipulation, hoping to convince you that your struggle means you're on the wrong path. But winter isn't a mistake in farming, it's part of the cycle. The farmer doesn't panic when winter comes. He knows that rest periods are necessary for future growth. He knows that apparent dormancy is actually deep root development. He knows that what looks like nothing happening on the surface is actually crucial preparation happening underground. Your difficult seasons aren't evidence that you're failing, they're evidence that you're growing. The times when you feel most vulnerable aren't proof that you should give up. They're opportunities to practice the very skills that will make you unshakable. When they come at you during your vulnerable seasons, with their guilt trips and manipulation, you can recognize it for what it is: their desperate attempt to exploit your temporary weakness. But temporary weakness isn't permanent weakness. Winter always leads to spring. How do you stay strong during these vulnerable seasons? You return to your daily practices. You water your roots even when you can't see the growth. You protect your energy even when you feel depleted. You trust your standards even when you feel uncertain. This is where most people fail. They mistake a difficult season for a wrong direction. They let temporary doubt override permanent truth. They abandon their growth because it feels hard rather than trusting that hard seasons are part of the process. But you're not most people anymore. You're someone who understands that manipulation thrives in your uncertainty and dies in your consistency. The most powerful thing you can do is develop an internal compass that no external force can interfere with. This compass isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting your ability to find the right answers for your life. Your internal compass is made up of your values, your boundaries, your intuition, and your standards. When these are clear and strong, external manipulation becomes irrelevant, because you're not looking outside yourself for direction. Think about it this way: if you have a strong internal compass, and someone tries to tell you that north is south, you don't get confused. You check your compass. You trust your instrument. You stay on course. But if you don't have an internal compass, if you're constantly looking to others to tell you which direction to go, then anyone can point you toward their destination instead of yours. Building this compass requires honest self-reflection. What do you actually value? Not what you think you should value. What boundaries do you actually need? Not what others think you should accept. What does your intuition actually tell you? Not what others say you should feel. This isn't selfish. It's necessary. You can't serve others from an empty cup, and you can't help others find their way if you don't know where you're going. The narcissist fears your internal compass more than anything else, because it makes their manipulation irrelevant. When you know who you are, what you want, and what you will and won't accept, their opinion becomes just noise in the background. They can tell you that you're being selfish, but your internal compass tells you that self-care is necessary. They can tell you that you've changed, but your internal compass tells you that growth is good. They can tell you that you're hurting people, but your internal compass tells you that healthy people don't require your dysfunction to feel secure. This is the foundation that makes you manipulation-proof. Not perfect, not invulnerable, but unshakable in your core truth. Strong enough to weather their storms, flexible enough to keep growing, wise enough to trust your own judgment. Building this foundation takes time, practice, and patience with yourself. But every day you invest in this process, every moment you choose your truth over their manipulation, every time you trust your compass over their confusion, you're building something they can never take away from you. You're building the version of yourself that doesn't need their approval to feel worthy, doesn't need their permission to grow, and doesn't need their validation to know your own value. And that version of yourself is about to change everything about how you live, how you love, and how you create the life you actually want, rather than the life they've convinced you to accept. That version of yourself, the one who doesn't need their approval to feel worthy, isn't just a dream, it's your birthright. But becoming that person requires more than understanding and foundation building. It requires mastering the art of living free, and that mastery comes through daily discipline, Who here has ever caught themselves thinking their old thoughts even after they knew better? Raise your hand if you've ever found yourself automatically apologizing for something that wasn't your fault, even after you swore you'd stop doing that. Keep them up if you've ever felt guilty for succeeding when you know success is your right. This happens because the narcissist doesn't just disappear when you recognize their manipulation. It becomes internalized. It becomes that critical inner that tells you you're being too much, asking for too much, expecting too much. It becomes the sabotage that attacks you from within. The most dangerous battle isn't the one you fight with them anymore. It's the one you fight with the version of that now lives in your head. This internalized is sneaky. It doesn't announce itself as manipulation. It disguises itself as wisdom, as humility, as being realistic. It whispers things like, maybe you should be grateful for what you have, when you're asking for what you deserve. It suggests, maybe you're expecting too much when your standards are perfectly reasonable. It warns, maybe you're being selfish when you're finally putting yourself. Recognition is your first weapon against this internal sabotage. Every time you catch yourself minimizing your achievements, apologizing for your growth, or feeling guilty for your happiness, stop. Ask yourself, whose is this really? Is this my authentic wisdom speaking, or is this their programming trying to pull me back? The difference is simple. Your authentic encourages your growth, while their programmed discourages it. Your authentic celebrates your progress, while their programmed finds fault with it. Your authentic supports your freedom, while their programmed tries to guilt you back into prison. Once you can distinguish between these C's, you can choose which one to listen to, and that choice, made consistently over time, is what creates permanent freedom. But here's what most people miss. You can't just stop listening to the sabotage. You have to replace it with something stronger. You have to become your own champion, your own encourager, your own validator. This means catching yourself when you minimize your wins, and consciously choosing to celebrate them instead. This means noticing when you apologize for having needs and consciously choosing to honor those needs instead. This means recognizing when you feel guilty for your growth, and consciously choosing to feel proud of it instead. The person sitting next to you might be struggling with this right now. In their head might be telling them that listening to this speech is selfish, that wanting more for themselves is greedy, that changing their patterns will hurt people they love. But that is lie. Becoming the healthiest version of yourself isn't selfish. It's the greatest gift you can give to everyone around you. Healthy people create healthy relationships. Strong people create stable environments. Free people inspire others to seek their own freedom. The real shift happens when you stop living reactively and start living creatively. For years you've been responding to their moods, their crises, their emergencies, their drama. You've been letting their emotional state determine your emotional state. You've been giving them the power to set the tone for your entire day, your entire week, your entire life. Living creatively means stepping back from the chaos and asking, what do I want to create here, instead of how should I react to them. When they come to you with manufactured drama, instead of getting pulled into it, you ask yourself, what kind of energy do I want to cultivate today? When they try to make their emergency your priority, instead of dropping everything, you ask yourself, what are actual priorities right now? When they attempt to make you feel guilty for your boundaries, instead of apologizing, you ask yourself, what do I want to model about self-respect? This shift from reactive to creative thinking changes everything about how you engage with manipulation. Because you're no longer dancing to their music, you're composing your own. They'll hate this. They'll escalate their tactics. They'll try harder to pull you back into reactive mode because reactive people are controllable people. But creative people, people who pause and choose their response rather than automatically reacting, are impossible to manipulate. Learning to respond from a place of choice rather than automatic programming takes practice. Start with small situations. When someone makes a comment designed to trigger you, instead of immediately defending yourself, take a breath and ask, what response would serve my highest good right now? Maybe it's setting a clear boundary. Maybe it's redirecting the conversation. Maybe it's simply choosing not to engage. The key is that you're choosing your response based on your values and goals, not on their manipulation tactics. This practice of conscious responding builds something remarkable, unshakable inner authority. You stop needing to prove yourself to people who will never be satisfied with your proof. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't interested in understanding. You stop defending your choices to people who benefit from your doubt. Instead, you start operating from a place of quiet confidence that doesn't require external validation. You make decisions based on your own wisdom rather than their approval. You set standards based on your own worth rather than their comfort level. But all of this requires daily discipline. Freedom isn't a destination you arrive at once. It's a practice you maintain every single day. Your morning sets the tone for everything that follows. Instead of immediately checking what everyone else needs from you, spend the first few minutes of your day checking in with yourself. How do you feel? What do you need? What are your priorities today? What kind of person do you want to be today? This isn't selfish, it's necessary. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you can't lead from an unclear mind. Taking time to center yourself each morning is like putting on armor before going into battle. Throughout your day, practice what I call boundary maintenance. This means checking in with your energy levels regularly and making adjustments as needed. When you feel your energy dropping, ask yourself why. Is it because you're doing meaningful work that challenges you, or because you're being drained by someone who takes more than they give? Learn the difference between tired from building and tired from being depleted. One leads to satisfaction and growth. The other leads to resentment and regression. End each day with reflection. What went well today? Where did you honor your boundaries? Where did you choose yourself? Where did you act from strength rather than fear? What would you do differently tomorrow? This isn't about perfection. It's about progress. Each day that you choose growth over comfort, truth over convenience, and self-respect over approval, you're building the life that manipulation cannot touch. Weekly, review your pattern. Are you consistently choosing responses that align with your values? Are you maintaining your standards even when it's uncomfortable? Are you celebrating your progress, or focusing only on what still needs work? Monthly, assess your goals and celebrate how far you've come. The person you were 3 months ago probably couldn't handle the situations you're navigating with grace today. The boundaries you can set now probably seemed impossible a year ago. The confidence you feel now was probably just a dream when you started this process. Acknowledge this growth. Celebrate this progress. Honor how far you've traveled. As you consistently practice these disciplines, something beautiful happens. You start attracting different kinds of people into your life. Healthy people are drawn to your energy. Authentic people appreciate your genuineness. Strong people respect your boundaries. The relationships you build from this place of strength are completely different from the relationships you maintained from a place of weakness. Instead of walking on eggshells, you communicate directly. Instead of avoiding conflict, you address issues honestly. Instead of sacrificing yourself to keep peace, you create real peace through mutual respect. You start recognizing opportunities that align with your authentic self, rather than accepting whatever scraps come your way. You begin creating the life you actually want, rather than enduring the life you think you have to accept. This isn't about becoming perfect, or never struggling again. It's about becoming strong enough to handle whatever comes your way without losing yourself in the process. It's about becoming secure enough in your own worth that other people's opinions become interesting rather than devastating. It's about remembering who you were before they convinced you to be small, who you are underneath all their programming, who you're meant to become when you stop apologizing for wanting more. That moment I mentioned at the beginning, the moment when you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start declaring this ends now. That wasn't just about recognizing their manipulation. That was about recognizing your own power. The fact that they had to resort to their final desperate trick proves how close you already are to complete freedom. Their panic is your progress report. Their escalation is your graduation notice. Their manipulation is their confession that you're winning.